you all for being here this evening. My name is Maury Hensley. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Fe Watershed Association. And my colleague Molly Walton is obviously not here. She wasn't able to make it this evening, but I'm sure you all will meet her on down the line if you don't know her already. As most of you know, the Santa Fe Watershed Association is a local nonprofit here in Santa Fe that was founded in 1997, and our mission is to build a thriving and resilient Santa Fe River watershed through collaboration, stewardship, and education that inspires us all to care for our land, water, and each other. And I really am so grateful that you have generously chosen to spend an hour or so of your evening with me this evening and help me and our team kick off this exciting project. Well, I'll try to briefly cover just background, context, the current planning effort, and then leave the majority of our time for discussion and want to be respectful of everybody's time. This grant, as I'll say again later, this project is funded through a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart Cooperative Watershed Management Program grant. So this is, as I'll talk about, the second grant that we've received through this program, and we're really excited to kind of bring the project full circle. As probably all of you know in this crowd, a watershed is, as we tell our fifth graders, a land area that flows to a single low point, and we are in nested watersheds like concentric circles. So here's just so that we're contextualizing where we are on the land. To your left is the Rio Grande watershed. The center is the middle Rio Grande area that we often talk about, and then to the lower right is the Santa Fe River watershed, where all of the surface water flows into the Santa Fe River if it makes it that far. Resilience, again, this is a word that we throw around a lot. It's in our proposal title, so I just wanted to spend a few moments getting us all on the same page that resilience, in the most simple terms, is a system's ability to respond to disturbance. And resilience kind of systems cycle through different phases of resilience and through different scales. And I was very lucky to and very nerdily to study with one of the coiners of this term, panarchy, and the developers of resilience theory in ecology. And so I just had to shout that out. But I think it's a really great way of understanding systems, including our watershed systems, and how different scales and different systems are interacting with each other, and what that means for how we are stewarding our watershed community. For a little bit more background on this project, many of you I know are already familiar with the first grant that the Watershed Association received in 2019. It was also a cooperative watershed management program grant, and this study was a 2-year study that we were really lucky to collaborate with Utah State University and Geosystems Analysis on. It happened during COVID, so of course some of the original goals of the project shifted a little bit, but what ended up happening is that we were really able to focus on values that stakeholders throughout our watershed share, or how folks are prioritizing value. So it was a really interesting and kind of unusual way to get stakeholders' perspectives even during COVID. And as you can see here, I think 3 very important takeaways from that study that are directly informing our current study are, first of all, that our watershed community, like many communities, has what Dr. Courtney Flint from Utah State University describes as low interactional capacity, and we'll get into more of what that means. But it basically it's kind of self-explanatory. It means that different interest groups, different stakeholders, different geographies are not very well connected, and I think that We're getting better, but I know that most of us in this room probably feel that in our day-to-day work, that there are a lot of silos that we are trying to break down. And so this study affirmed that there's a lot of potential for us to increase our interactional capacity, which in turn strengthens our community resilience. The second key takeaway was that common ground in watershed values and priorities does exist even among diverse stakeholders. So we'll dive into that more as well. And the third takeaway is that there are process-based opportunities for planning efforts and implementation efforts. So even for really well-designed plans, there are process-based ways to include more community members and really help the community feel more part of that process and feel more invested in its outcome. As a very brief overview, here's an example of, the folks that we interviewed. So we had 2 rounds of interviews that were mostly on Zoom, because again, this was during COVID when that had some challenges for us reaching folks as well. But we still had a pretty broad array of folks from different interest groups, as you can see. So in our first round, we did 56 interviews with 63 people, all kind of key stakeholders within our watershed from different sectors. The second phase was this Q-sort analysis, which is more common in the social sciences. It was the first time I had ever heard of it, but it's kind of a more quantitative way to assess qualitative information. And so participants were able to rank the entire list of priorities that were given in the first round of interviews in this sort of triangle looking grid here on the right. So they were basically able to, each priority was written on a card, and they were able to rank those priorities, highest being toward the right and lowest being toward the left. So it wasn't a linear ranking, and so there was just a little more of an opportunity for nuanced conversations as a result of that. Interestingly enough, there were some unifying themes among these diverse stakeholders through both phases of the interview process. So after the first interview, the top priorities across the board were water flow in the river, wildfire threats, water quality, ecosystem health, and water conservation. And it's really interesting to see how that translates, if not exactly the same words, into the top priorities that held true after the Q-sort process. So preparing for climate change, I mean, good job to our community, was the #1 unifying theme among our diverse stakeholders. So I take a lot of hope in that and feel very proud of our colleagues that we're on the same page about that. Protecting native species, emphasizing pollution standards and water quality, ecological justice and equity, fire management and planning were all top priorities. So you can really see the overlaps in shared values that held true across those 2 phases of interviews. Even within these shared values and shared priorities, of course, there were nuanced understandings of these issues. So I know the text is very small and you don't have to be able to read all of this, and the report is on our website, but this is just to give you an idea of how even within sort of an umbrella category that many people care about, they have different ways of understanding that issue, understandably. And so I think that this is really important for informing how we have conversations, even as we're trying to build from a place of common ground. It's really important how we integrate nuance into those conversations. The perceived obstacles that folks really highlighted in the watershed to these watershed priorities, of course, funding was the top perceived obstacle, but assumptions of opposition, barriers to stakeholder participation, as well as drought, climate change, and invasive species. And I want to insert here briefly that a lot of these priorities have to do with, with interactional capacity. So of course we have some barriers that are kind of going to exist no matter what we do, like drought and climate change. But some of these other priorities have more to do with our systems, or we have kind of a little more power in how we deal with these assumed obstacles that stakeholders highlighted for us. So this is a diagram that kind of illustrates what the idea of interactional capacity is. On the left, you have kind of status quo, siloed sectors that are not interacting much. And on the right, you have this ability of a local community to work together and mobilize resources around shared interests in times of need. So I think it's pretty obvious how interactional capacity helps with community resilience. If we're already aware of each other's existence, if we are already connected, we can much better support each other and understand how to move through a crisis together when it does occur. So going back to these perceived obstacles, I really want to focus in on the assumptions of opposition and the barriers to stakeholder participation. I think that these two perceived obstacles really highlight the opportunity of increasing our interactional capacity. That, interestingly, as we saw, there are shared values among diverse stakeholders, but stakeholders feel like they are in complete opposition to other stakeholders in the watershed. So I think that's a really key piece to keep in mind as we move forward. The other is that kind of process-based takeaway that many stakeholders feel like there are barriers to stakeholder participation, and of course that's an ongoing struggle that many of us are constantly working to overcome or to improve, but recognizing that the more connected we are, the more collaborative we can be, the better able we're able to include stakeholders in the process. To hammer home this idea of interactional capacity, which of course is, spoiler alert, a primary goal of this second phase of the watershed planning process, is to build interactional capacity. So the more we build interactional capacity through kind of taking advantage of catalysts for collaboration, but also investing the time in the processes, building trust across stakeholder interest groups, and finding shared goals that we can unify around, and also integrating different systems of knowledge are ways that we can build interactional capacity and, as an extension of that, improve our community's resilience. Related to that process-based finding, once again, another finding from the study was that many stakeholders we interviewed did not see themselves as at the table or kind of having power or agency in planning and implementation processes. And so I think this really highlights, again, those barriers to stakeholder participation, and also those assumptions of opposition. How can we help a more diverse array of stakeholders feel valued in the process, and how can we help their voices feel heard in a way that they feel like they're at the table for issues that they care about. There were multiple recommendations from this report that I've kind of glossed over briefly, but I'll just read through them. The first one is emphasize the synergy across interests in watershed priorities, such as water security and flow, climate change, stormwater management, and groundwater recharge. Take the time to understand the nuances in perspectives and priorities related to wildfire and forest management, water rights, water quality, and water infrastructure. Beware of assumptions of opposition across traditional interest groups. Facilitate engagement across stakeholders early and throughout deliberation processes for input and collaboration. ensure proactive government-to-government dialogue and negotiations over water issues with pueblos. Obviously, this is for those of us who are not government entities. This is just making sure that we are also aware of those processes and understanding how those processes need to happen in order for pueblos to be included in an official capacity if necessary. Provide and seek out cultural literacy training and information to support deepening interactional capacity, and build interactional capacity for watershed resilience by catalyzing collaboration, taking time to build trusting relationships around shared goals, and integrating diverse ways of knowing. So obviously that is a lot of recommendations, and it's a lofty list. But the Watershed Association ourselves we've really been trying to take these recommendations to heart as we've applied for this current grant, but also in the ways that we're participating in other processes throughout the watershed. So that kind of brings us to the current moment, the context where we're coming into this watershed planning process. As many of you know, or all of you know, there are a lot of other plans and projects happening throughout the watershed. And so I think the opportunity for this plan is, again, to build that interactional capacity, not just among stakeholder groups, but among these plans as much as possible. It's really a special and unusual opportunity for all of these different planning processes throughout the watershed, and this is not an exhaustive list, to be happening all at the same time. And so to be able to contextualize that or bring in the watershed holistic perspective into this conversation, I think is a really special opportunity. So that, like I said, brings us to this current plan, and thank you all for being here to listen to me yammer on about it a little bit. But the primary goal of this plan, the overarching goal, is to build and sustain resilience in the Santa Fe River watershed. We want to do that through connecting to other planning processes, past, present, and future, and we want to translate these values and these recommendations into some tangible projects based on these shared values and priorities. So this plan is very excitingly the first ever plan for our entire watershed, and I know that many of you in this room have been working towards this moment longer than I have, and so it's really exciting to be taking the next step, be looking at this watershed-wide perspective right now in this moment. So I feel very honored to be part of this process. And also very freaked out, so thanks for helping me in advance. Like I said, it is funded through the Bureau of Reclamation's Cooperative Watershed Management Program. And this plan is meant to be a big picture blueprint that focuses on restoration priorities. So we'll get to what the plan is not, but that it's a strategic look. It's not a granular level, everything related to water. We're really looking at the watershed through the lens of restoration in particular. We're hoping that it will be a holistic effort to enhance interactional capacity and at least take another step in that direction. And we hope that this plan will be a helpful framework for future plans and implementation projects, which I know as much as all of us would like to stop planning and check that off the box, we know that planning is infinite. So if this can be a helpful framework for future projects, that would be ideal. I also wanted to say that the word restoration itself I know is very complex, but I think that we're really committed in this process to collaboratively defining that in a contextualized way. The plan is not, of course, a silver bullet that will solve all of our water-related problems in our watershed. And so that, it's just one more step towards building that interactional capacity and resilience. This, of course, is not a legally binding document. We will not be exploring gray infrastructure or utilities, fire or PFAS. That's the great thing about all of these other planning processes that are happening, is that this plan does not need to and will not cover those arenas, again, we'll be focusing through this restoration-based lens. This is also not related to other water smart projects that are happening in our area. And of course, it's not a way for the Watershed Association in all of our power and influence to monopolize future water projects or programs. We're really hoping that this is a plan that can support all of our partners in one way or another. Overall, we have 3 main goals under that overarching goal that I already discussed. So under this first goal of increasing interactional capacity and supporting ongoing collaboration, we have the goal of just compiling existing studies, plans, and education materials and keeping them updated on our website so that members of the public, other partners and collaborators can access them, and so that we can have some better interface for some shared knowledge around our watershed. Secondly, we will be conducting targeted stakeholder outreach. So this we do have a survey, which I'll talk about, but we are not doing a kind of structured stakeholder, like general public stakeholder outreach for this plan. We will be reaching out to key landowners and stakeholders, doing site visits. It will be very targeted and place-based to identify those restoration priorities. Thirdly, we aim to start an annual watershed forum to deepen connection and collaboration. So get out your calendars and mark off 2027, probably February-ish. But the goal of this, again, is really to keep building interactional capacity and just give folks a place to connect, even if it's just once a year, even if it's just a day or a half a day. We'll probably start small, but we don't quite have that for folks from throughout the watershed to gather, to have the opportunity to learn about some of the ongoing projects, the ongoing studies, but also then to connect and to collaborate across shared challenges or shared victories throughout the watershed. So that, stay tuned for that. The second goal of this plan is actually to write a plan. So within this, we are hoping to identify and describe some best management practices, also based on that first stakeholder assessment that kind of can support improving ongoing outreach planning and implementation, not only through Watershed Association projects, but also for other partners if it's hopefully useful. And then of course, we will be identifying the highest priority areas for restoration aligned with stakeholder values and recommendations. So we really are trying to emphasize those shared values and build on that and kind of look through the lens of common ground and find restoration projects that kind of meet those parameters to the best of our ability. Lastly, we will identify at least 3 potential restoration projects in the upper, middle, and lower watersheds and prepare site-specific preliminary designs. So we really want this plan to be action-oriented and to have some clear next steps coming out of this plan. And so we'll also try to identify some of those ever-shifting funding priorities that might be able to support these ongoing designs. The scale of those designs is likely on the demonstration scale, of course. Yeah, I think we'll be trying to have that action-oriented last goal coming out of this plan. The timeline, last of all, this is a 3-year grant. So through the rest of this year, we'll be compiling existing plans and beginning community outreach like tonight. So thanks for signing in. In 2026, we'll be trying to conduct targeted community outreach and site evaluations, which will continue in 2027, along with hosting that first watershed forum, which we will hope to be able to continue after the grant is over through other funding mechanisms. And finally, in 2028, we will be drafting up the plan. We will try to have a draft available to present to partners at that early 2028 forum to get feedback and then to release the final plan in September of 2028. So finally, here's a QR code. There are QR codes over there. If you have ideas, or if you have people who have ideas of restoration locations, we'd love to get the coordinates and do some site visits. Also, if you have key plans, studies, histories, books, links, people that we should definitely incorporate into this information gathering phase, you can also give that information on the survey. And of course, there's a blank box as well, so that you can provide any other feedback you would like. The survey will be live through the extent of the planning process. So that's just one very small way that we're really committed to making this a collaborative and transparent process. The other one last caveat I will make is that, of course, federal funding is not quite as stable as it once was, and so while we are extremely lucky to have a signed contract, we are also taking it day by day and understanding that this timeline or the extent of the project might change just depending on what is happening that is outside of our control. So, but really, really grateful for all of you being here tonight and carving out some time, and really looking forward to working with all of you over the next 3 years and beyond. So I'll take some questions. Man, that was really timely too. I'm really proud of myself.